Here's what they said in this scrapbook. Welcome to Entertainment Vietnam, Volume 2. Within the compound pictured below can be found the nerve center of one of the most complex and important programs in Vietnam, entertainment. During the past 3 years, the program has endured great growth. Turn the pages and view that which is the greatest morale booster today. Well, among the bands that they sent out to entertain fellow troops were rock bands, such as Fixed Water, a psychedelic band from the 1st Infantry Division. And there were other bands that had sort of psychedelic names: the Marshmallow Steam Shovel, Peace Pack, the OD Circus, the New Society, and the Electric Grunts. And these posters that they made sort of replicated the new kind of psychedelic posters being made on the home front as part of the counterculture. So here, through the official channels of Vietnam, we see this counterculture, this kind of new expressive culture from the domestic U.S. circulating to Vietnam, appearing here in the war zone. And indeed, this effort through official channels to bring rock music to Vietnam did raise troop morale. Here we see Fixed Water from the previous poster receiving their certificate at the end of their 60-day temporary duty for their service. In audience evaluation forms that were handed out to troops after performances, which I find amazing, there were comments such as the following. Seemed to like the acid rock music the most. Also the bands themselves would file after-action reports on their tours of duty and had similar comments. In many of these, the troops declared that their favorite number was the encore that many bands played, War, What Is It Good For? Absolutely Nothing. This was one of the favorite songs of troops in Vietnam. Here we see some photographs, give you a sense, and I'll just go through these so you can kind of get a sense of what this looked like, and some of the material I'm working with, of these bands touring through Vietnam. Performing at officers' clubs, on Navy ships, and at remote outposts throughout Vietnam. Now, I think kind of intersecting with this official military culture was what we could call a kind of vernacular troop culture, a civic troop culture as well. And this vernacular culture, I think, is harder to perceive than the official channels. It would be easy to argue that the military co-opted rock music, and rock music was not political, which I think is probably true. But rock music was doing something else in the war zone, and it was doing something, I think, which played with the citizen-soldier identity. Thinking carefully about this strange hybrid of being a citizen soldier, playing with that civic half of the identity. A few glimpses of this civic culture that we can try to glimpse. There was a constant struggle between the bands and the officers in charge of the entertainment venues at various bases about performing in uniform, following all the codes and regulations. The bands kept shedding their uniforms, and the officers in the venues kept trying to get them back in them. This turns up repeatedly, as if the soldiers were literally trying to shed their soldier identities while performing and listening to the music. Now, of course, it also was very hot, and that's part of it as well. But I think you see in the after-action reports this kind of tension continually about the mode of the performance, how the troops were to appear as they played the music. And of course, we see this vernacular culture associated with rock and the counterculture appearing in other guises, writ upon the bodies of troops or jewelry and such on, as in this very famous photograph by Tim Page, who turned up in an earlier presentation, of a soldier wearing a peace symbol and a bandolier. the conflicts in which this soldier was embedded as a citizen soldier in a very confusing war environment. Another famous photo of a soldier who has labeled himself a hippie as well on his helmet in the famous ways that Vietnam soldiers marked up their helmets. Now, something we can get into if people want to talk about it more in our discussion segment, but rock music and soul music intermingled in interesting ways toward the end of the Vietnam War. Here we see a poster for the very popular band Jimmy and the Everyday People, one of these CMTS bands, performing rock and soul. And indeed, one that in an oral history interview talks about the kinds of alliances that were forged in music between the heads, the soldiers who were interested in the hippie counterculture, and the bloods, the black soldiers. I think drugs, especially marijuana and rock music, became crucial ways in which these soldiers formed a kind of separate space for thinking about the war, thinking about themselves within the war, thinking about their relationship to the home front and this changing counterculture that was part of the domestic consumer culture of the U.S. In these new ways. Here's a picture of Jimmy and the Everyday People. Now, again, we see this interaction between the official level of troop culture and the vernacular troop culture. AFVN went out and performed surveys of troops to try to figure out what they should put on the air. From 1968 to 1971, they found that their troops wanted to hear more acid rock music, and hence the program we heard at the beginning of my talk, the Sgt. Pepper Free Radio program, was born of this audience response. But there also, of course, were countless ways in which troops gathered around radios, portable cassette recorders, which were coming into the market at this point, portable phonograph record players, in which they could play rock music from home. And so we hear a lot in veterans talk about the war, about the bullshit net, which was this use of the radio, the unused channels on radio frequencies to play rock music and sort of DJ their own shows. And one vet says, we listened to Janis Joplin, and home music, so definitely we were anti-war. It's odd to say that. And I think, as this vet's hesitation suggests, once again, rock was not directly political. It was not just politics by another means, but it was this way in which soldiers began to think about, to ponder their situation in the war. It served a kind of function as a public sphere in which soldiers could recalibrate their own personal identity vis-a-vis the larger institutions they were caught up within. We see this, I think, also in the use of drugs, in ways that music and marijuana particularly mixed in Vietnam to create these spaces in which soldiers would step outside of their soldier identity into a kind of citizen identity. And the question then was, well, citizens of what? What was this new kind of citizenship that they were beginning to explore?